We have a special guest here on the BWI Live Recruiting Show. We're kicking out Ryan. Actually, Ryan's on vacation. He's on a staycation. I don't know what he's doing. He's just not here today. So, one of the things that we've done here on the show in the past, and maybe some of you haven't seen it in a while because we got a lot of new members in the last 5-ish months, we're bringing back the BWI Mailbag. So you are the featured guest here at the end of the show once we get through some of these recruiting conversation and topics over the last week that have cropped up. Some, this is the planning season. I'm terrible at planning, Fitz. I know you have a more structured household than we do here. Everything here is pretty haphazard. But it takes me a while to remember, like, hey, what do we do at this time every year? How does this go? I don't write anything down. So it's planning season. February is, hey, this guy's coming for an official visit. This guy's coming for a spring visit. This guy's going to be, down the list. So that's where we are right now. And that's what we're talking about on today's show. Guys who Blue White Illustrated has reached out to find out, hey, coming to visit Penn State in the spring. So those are the topics, plus a bunch of other stuff here on the show today from you in the BWI Mailbag. If you want to drop your questions, comments, concerns, all in the chat, we'll get to them at the end of the show specifically. So drop in a real thinker of a question for us, and we'll get to that at the end of the show. Fitz, how you doing today? Welcome.
I'm great. I appreciate the the thought that we have our affairs in order over on this side and that we're more organized. That's just not simply the case. It's a different kind of controlled chaos. My oldest just turned 12 this week, so we got 2 birthday parties this weekend. We've got all this kind of stuff. So it's good. It's good that the dead period is here in February. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day. My oldest was born in February, and now that's a dead period. That was not a dead period whenever he was born. And then my youngest is in the middle of July, which that is now a full dead period as well. And I remember the day he was born, Penn State had a camp at Beaver Stadium, and so it worked out pretty well to be able to have those birthdays in dead periods. It's a different kind of chaos as well, but you are looking at a downtime in the calendar, as you would expect to go with the dead period. For those that aren't caught up on the lingo, the dead period does not mean that you can't contact and you can't be in touch with these guys. It just means they can't visit, you can't visit them. Just kind of puts the kibosh on all off-campus contact, which means essentially coaches can go on vacation, which, depending who you talk to, there's varied thoughts of schools of thought on this measure, but they deserve a vacation because they do work a lot, especially in college football, which is why we are seeing an exodus to the pros, because there's nothing to do right now if you're a pro coach in the best way possible. So you're looking at all these different things that come into it. But from a recruiting standpoint, from a recruiting show standpoint, we're in an in-between time, and which I think has some people a little antsy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So let's get into today's first topic, which, of course, is the spring visit schedule. And really, this is going to get into the schedule conversation in general. So a couple of guys have made announcements that they're going to be joining Penn State for spring football. The one who put it out publicly, we'll start here, is a guy who Penn State fans are familiar with because he was committed to Penn State at one point, which is Layton von Brandt, the, I think, number 6 offensive tackle in the nation. So what do you take away from this and his schedule of visits, which includes all the names and faces you would expect if he was formerly committed to Penn State on the offensive line?
Yeah, Von Brandt's been a guy. He's been out and about a bunch, committed to Penn State very early. I think it was a great fit. Of course, being from Delaware, right down the road, Penn State's had a ton of success in Delaware, and kind of it's almost an in-state program, or excuse me, it's almost an in-state recruit. I mean, you're looking at what Penn State's done in Delaware over the years, and they haven't lost many, in the ones that they have, more extenuating circumstances there. But he's going to go to Virginia Tech. He's going to go to Florida. He's going to go to Auburn, Tennessee, Notre Dame, and Penn State. Penn State's is April 18th. You've got an opportunity there to sort of close his spring on a strong key, and you're going to go into official visits then. If he decides to do that, I still think he probably will, considering where you're at in the calendar right now. It's so jumbled right now because you're thinking February to June is a long, long time. And it is, it's forever in recruiting talk, but a lot of these guys are going to want to get to the spring, get to official visits, and eventually sort of maximize their value, maximize their deals via official visits, which I think is probably the right way to go from a player standpoint, because you're looking at, the guys that commit early do so for a reason, and that's great. I think those guys are the the sort of the keystones of most classes. But at the same time, if you're a high profile recruit, you're going to go see what other programs want to offer you. I mean, it's a little different than the past, isn't it? You're looking at something very different. So, if he gets out and sees a bunch of these schools this spring, he'll probably circle back around and see more of these schools in the summer. You look at Florida, that's certainly a threat because Phil Troutwine's there, and players, they really like Phil Troutwine, and we've seen that with Max Hiller having having Florida in his top 4 without Penn State. And now Von Brandt's going to go down there and check things out. A bit of a homebody here, although he is open to going to a bunch of different places as his schedule would indicate. He's been in touch with Ryan Clanton since the beginning. Really, he was one of the first guys that was reoffered by the new staff, and I think there's always going to be interest there. He would have been a guy that if he was in the class last year and that class would have stayed together, I don't think he would have taken more visits. I don't think he would have done anything like that. He really likes Penn State, really likes the opportunity to play close to home. So we will continue to monitor that situation. But, it's a much different situation than it was almost a year ago when he committed.
Yeah, a guy that when you're talking about players that fit in the class of 2027 and guys that are priority targets, I've been trying to think about this of like, who are the important players, who are the guys that are going to be the stars of this particular class for this administration. And I understand Keemon Spell, Khalil Taylor, all the names that we start off with and rattle off at the top that are Pennsylvania products. But like, who are the guys that really fit this group? And Layton von Brandt, to me, is one of those guys that really climbs to the top pretty quickly in terms of Ryan Clanton and what we learned about him and what he wants out of football players and what he wants out of offensive linemen. And then, from the physical perspective, Layton von Brandt lacks almost nothing from the athletic perspective. He's been big for a while. He's growing into his frame and is a player that a lot of teams will want, which is why he has the option to go a bunch of different places. Who else on this list do you find interesting? Who's somebody that piques your interest as what we've been talking about over the last week when it comes to recruiting?
One of the first guys that they reached out to, probably even before they had a defensive line coach on board with Matt Campbell, was Mekhi Brown from Greenwich Country Day in Greenwich, Connecticut. This guy he's quite big. If you look around, there's not too many bigger edge prospects out there. 6'6", 235, and I would guess that might be conservative, just based on some of the photos we've seen, based on some of the measurements we've gotten. So I'm pretty high on his prospects as a big defensive end. He's probably gonna be 270 pounds at some point and won't look much different than he does at 235. So big guy. Penn State was on him very early as with the old staff, and that has carried over. And I think that a lot of programs have looked at this guy and said, this is a potential NFL body, and we want to take a look. So Mekhi Brown's going to be back in town on April 3rd. I think he'll be one of those official visit guys. Off the top of my head, I don't think he has one scheduled right now, but I will follow back up with that and see if I'm wrong, as I often am when I try to do things off the top of my head. But I think Penn State is in a good spot. Another one of those Northeast guys that makes a lot of sense. But he's going to see a ton of places as well. Going to go to Florida, North Carolina, Missouri, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, South Carolina, Kentucky, Notre Dame, and UCLA. So racking up the frequent flyer miles is Mekhi Brown. Those are all via Chad Simmons.
Southern schools.
What's that?
A lot of Southern schools there, and then UCLA and Penn State, Notre Dame.
A lot of everywhere schools, yeah. So I mean, you're looking at him all over the map, and I think he's a guy that maybe got into his recruitment a little bit later, and that's crazy because we're still fairly early in the 2027 cycle. But sometimes guys get on the radar early and they visit a bunch of schools. He's mostly been to Penn State so far, been to Rutgers a few times as well. So he's going to get out and see more of these schools. Been to Rutgers 4 times, Boston College twice, Penn State 3 times, Syracuse. So all those things are going to pop up and go beyond regional, if that makes sense, with Mekhi Brown, who we have actually ranked pretty highly. He's in the industry. He's a 4-star, number 68 nationally, number 7 edge. We have him at number 32 overall, and number 5 edge, top player in Connecticut on all services. I think he's a good player. It's just it's so early. You're going to get this from me this early for pretty much everybody. It's like, he's ranked too high. I think that it'll even itself out in the end. He'll be a very, very solid 4-star, maybe a top 100 player.
Yeah, he's just huge and playing in Connecticut. So I think that there is a projection there a little bit just based on, I mean, just in the highlights there, he had a batted pass against a defensive or an offensive tackle that I think was probably 5'10", 5'11". So there is that when it comes to Northeast recruiting and trying to understand the talent level. But yeah, I'm excited about the body types they're recruiting at defensive end. It's different, and that's also why it's interesting, but it's also the fact that they're 6'6", huge frames, guys that can do a bunch of versatile things. I'm interested to see what they produce at defensive end, and if these guys can hit the upside, because we've been discussing elite athletes at the defensive end position that are in that Von Miller type body type, right? And that's the going back to 2000, early 2010s. That's the body type that a lot of people have been trying to find and replicate. The Micah Parsons, the Abdul Carter, that hybrid edge rusher who isn't the 6'6", 275-pound defensive end that we've known about in football since, the 70s. Going back to those guys, I think it's interesting. I think that it's going to be fun to see what they can do and see if they can get those guys that have the length and power to be true pass rushing threats while also being great run defenders.
You need both, right? I mean, we used to rank these guys as strong side defensive ends and weak side defensive ends, and that just became tedious and stupid. But you look at a roster makeup, and you really, really wanted the twitchy guy this year opposite Dennis Sutton, because Dennis is a type of player, a great player, but at the same time, he's not Abdul, he's not Chop, and I think that played into some people's minds in terms of expectations was for him to be the sack guy by doing what those guys did. And he's just not built to do that. And that's fine. I mean, he's not that guy. Max Granville was probably that guy this year. And then, hurt his knee last year and missed the season. So you always want to sort of counterbalance with those. And I think that's regardless of staff, whether that be the Franklin staff, the Campbell staff, or any staff in the country. You want the guys that can get around and get to the quarterback as best as possible, by any means necessary. But I mean, it's almost like, we were talking about quarterbacks a couple of weeks ago, when you're talking about the prospect versus the player, and sort of the player is usually the 6'3", from a defensive end standpoint, a 6'3", 250 guy that can get around you and can play and can play a little bit more compact, which really helps in the college game. It doesn't help you as much in the pros. You can certainly make it in the pros like that, but you're going to have that higher floor and the ability to, again, walk and chew gum a little bit sooner, and that's going to help everything. So I think that you're looking for a balance there. Mekhi Brown, good looking prospect no matter what, but it's just a little bit different. And I will say it's a bit different for him. He's playing in Connecticut, playing at Greenwich Country Day, and that's different than Avon Old Farms. It's different than the prep schools that we've become accustomed to seeing Penn State go in, and all these schools in the country go in and recruit phenomenal football up there in New England. A lot of those kids probably a year older, but you're looking at a different New England prep situation with Mekhi Brown than you are with most Penn State prospects.
Let's stay on the D line and discuss defensive body types on the defensive line. Aiden O'Neal is a very interesting football player. Just curious what you think of him and his fit with the Nittany Lions as he plays kind of that tweener role between defensive tackle and defensive end, at least to my eye. How do you see this fit in this relationship here as they go into spring football? Apparently going to have him up as well.
Yeah, Don Bosco prep guy. And that's one spot where I think Matt Campbell's been trying to work his way in, those North Jersey parochial schools. It's been a sore spot for Penn State for a while. They've, had some success, pulled some guys in there. Malachi Goodman was a Paramus Catholic guy, but you're looking at it's been more of a challenge than it probably should be based on location. And Bosco, St. Peter's Prep, some of those schools just have not been great for Penn State. And I think that they've really made an effort. Matt Campbell went up there and spoke to that group 3 weeks ago, something like that. And I think it was well received. But it's a matter of fit. It's a matter of finding what's going in. I think Notre Dame's always going to be a spot because of all the circumstances there that makes a ton of sense for most of these kids. And then we see them sort of branching out, and some of them have been SEC bound over the last couple of years. So Penn State just hasn't been the fit or the preference, really. I mean, I'm going to say fit, but I'm going to say preference for a lot of these kids. Aiden O'Neal's been to camp a couple of times. You and I have seen him in person. He is one of those guys that, you could label a tweener, but that's not exactly how you would look at this guy, because tweener, you're usually thinking a little bit shorter, but he's 6'5", 250. We see him probably more as as an interior guy eventually. But Penn State looks at him as a defensive end right now, based on
Yeah.
our feedback from the last couple of weeks. So Aiden O'Neal is interesting. I think he's one of those bigger lumbering guys that's not as twitchy as what we just talked about, but at the same time, productive guy at one of the better programs in the Northeast.
And still athletic. That's kind of what I was getting at, where I think he'd be a hard defensive tackle prospect for the previous staff. But with
Right.
the things that they like to do up front, I could see him being a defensive end. I could see him being
5 tech.
285 pounds.
Yeah.
5 tech, play both, play across the line of scrimmage. So just an interesting player of how he can fit in a defense and might work to their advantage, where you don't have to label him as anything right now. He's a defensive lineman, he's a defensive end, whatever he wants to be, and then his body shape and will take over, and they'll find a spot for him in the lineup later. Once he's fully developed, I think that can be an advantage for some of them with some of these guys that we've seen, where they have that kind of tweener, in a good way, the tweener status of like, is he going to get so big? At one point, we thought Ivan Kamaju would be a defensive tackle, and his body, he leaned out and he kind of didn't hit the accelerator on the mass side of things with his frame. O'Neal, maybe he looks like a guy that can play well enough in space, but not somebody that you're going to be putting out as a guy you want to drop into coverage.
Right.
Any other players from the spring visit schedule you want to get to? Any other interesting situations you think are developing for the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, we'll go with one more, tight end Sean Curry from the Lawrenceville School in New Jersey. That's an interesting one to me. He's committed to Virginia. Has been committed to Virginia for a while. A great lacrosse player as well. I believe he's committed to play lacrosse at Virginia, which is nothing to sniff at there, certainly. But big guy that can run. And this is a guy that he committed fairly early. I think the lacrosse played a lot into that. If you know lacrosse, a lot of these guys are committed as freshmen and sophomores in high school. It's pretty crazy to see how all that plays out. But Curry has ascended on the football field, and he has ascended as a prospect as well. His offer list looks good. Penn State went to see him multiple times. We have him as a 3-star prospect right now on Rivals with an 87 ranking. Way too early to be talking rankings on that, but that's what you're looking at. So he's been to Penn State a couple of times, and Penn State makes a bunch of sense for him from a location standpoint, from a tight end perspective, which is tricky because the staff that developed tight ends is no longer here. But some of the tight ends that were here and have had success are still here and are going to have success, I feel, with a guy like Andrew Rappelier. We'll see how this one develops, but he's going to, without being condescending, he's going to outgrow his Virginia commitment. He's got Penn State looking at him. He's got Florida State. He's got Ohio State. He's got a ton of things going on for him, which makes a bunch of sense. Going out to Ohio State in March, it's going to be Penn State in April. Texas A&M is in there as well. So this guy has sufficiently blown up. I think it's a matter of time before his rating catches up to that. And again, we haven't done ratings on 2027 guys. I know everybody's looking at these guys and saying 3-star, 3-star, 3-star. We haven't done ratings for 2027 guys since before the end of their season. So give it some time. Let it marinate a little bit. You'll be fine. Sean Curry
is Lawrenceville where the Lumpris,
yes,
the Lumpri are from?
The Lumpri, yes, the plural of Lumpris. Yes, you're looking at two very, very good tight end prospects, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know which one is better. Colt Lumpris, a Penn State target, is committed to Alabama. Yep. Sean Curry is committed to Virginia. Again, I don't know which one is better. You've got some good options there. I've always been on the train of thought that Colt Lumpris looks like a really, really awesome, like, if I had to play a dynasty and see somebody grow into an offensive tackle, that's he's got great lower body. He's got a ton of functional athleticism and strength like that. I that's what I see when I see him. But at the same time, he's going to Alabama to play tight end. They know a lot more than me about everything, really. So you're looking at an evaluation that's probably a little bit different than mine.
So I mentioned this a little bit earlier about guys that might take a step forward in terms of priority in the new Penn State offense and defense, but just generally, those are some of the names that are out right now. There's going to be more coming out in the next couple of weeks, and again, go to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for that information. Sign up right now, and you get a week of access to try us out, see if you want to be a part of that. We'll have recruiting, football, all kinds of stuff to keep you warm through the February doldrums. But then spring football is going to come around on the other side, and all that information is going to then pay off with the actual visits and spring football. Some of the names that you're looking for? Who are some guys maybe you have an eye on to have an announcement they're going to visit Penn State for spring football in the next couple of days or weeks?
Yeah, you start inside out, right? You look at this state, and I think I've said this before, but Penn State's evaluation and our evaluation and state prospects and our evaluation is subject to change as we continue to release rankings, and that'll be next month, I think it is. But kind of different. There are some guys in Pennsylvania that they're high on that we're not as high on, and vice versa, essentially. But a guy that I'm looking at that's a key one to get back is Abraham Cisse from Downingtown East. This is a guy that I've been high on for a really long time, and schools are catching up, and other programs are doing a lot to try and get in there. Notre Dame is a huge threat right now. Notre Dame has really taken the relationships that he had with guys like Kenny Sanders, and made them theirs, if you will. So yeah. I think that plays into it. So getting him back to the spring to set the table for an official visit, I think is massive for a guy like Abraham Cisse. And then, of course, at some point they're going to hire a receivers coach, and that's nothing to update there. But at the same time, guy like Cade Cooper at Malvern Prep, very big. And then Khalil Taylor is he's visited a ton. But at the same time, you'd like to have a guy in place to solidify that official visit, solidify that standing in general, and go from there.
All right. Want to tell you about our sponsor on today's show, which is Liberty Lumber Products. And the great thing is they have an awesome social media presence. And so Justin, the owner of Liberty Lumber Products, can introduce himself.
How's it going, Nittany Lion fans? My name is Justin. I'm born and raised in Pennsylvania, and this is my wood shop. We are Liberty Lumber Products. Come here, I want to show you a few things. So my company is now officially licensed with Penn State. So I want to show you the products that are now available on our online store. We now have some coasters that are available. These are handmade by our team here at Liberty Lumber Products. We have some very talented carpenters here. And we also have this cooler that's now available. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. Please follow us on our socials and check out what we have coming next. We've got some big things.
Link in the description of the video. You can check out Liberty Lumber Products. I wanted to show you this one where they have this really cool pub table. It's a Penn State inspired pub table, and like he said, they have the officially licensed logo, so they can make your Penn State fan cave as authentic as you can possibly get. And you can check it out, Liberty Lumber Products. The link is in the description of the video. This thing is really, really cool looking. I'm going to show you the final product here in 1 second once we get through this video. This is, by the way, when I'm not here on YouTube, these are the kind of videos that I watch on YouTube, with just a bunch of woodworking videos and people doing a bunch of cool stuff with really high grade lumber. So this is the finished product of the walnut dining table, pub table. Excuse me, not a dining table, walnut pub table. So if you've got a Penn State fan cave and you want to make it look really nice and you want officially licensed gear, go to libertylumberproducts.com and use the promo code. This is the thing I always forget, is use the promo code PSUFans to get 10% off at checkout. And that way they know you came from us, and you get 10% off. And with something like this, you even get free shipping on your purchase. So check them out, libertylumberproducts.com. Use the promo code PSUFans to make sure that you get that 10% off, and you let them know that you came from us. So official visits, Fitz, you talked about the next phase of this whole process is you get everyone to know each other. You come to practice. You get to see how they run the camp. You get to see the coaches in action, and then you get to decide, hey, I want to see what everything else has to do with Penn State and with the official visits. So that's the next part of the schedule. Some of these guys have made their announcements. Penn State right now has 5 players that have made official announcements according to our visits tab over at on3.com. Some of the names out there that came up, there's a safety. We've played this game already from the West Coast. Malachi Tofu, I think, Taufo. He recently has announced not only is he going to come, he's coming for an official visit. So wondering what your thoughts are in the situation here with some of these West Coast relationships that Penn State has with this new staff.
Yeah, it's been one of the fascinating developments over the last couple of months, because it's just not something we're used to, really. You know, guys have visited from the West Coast. Of course, Penn State's going to have a starting corner in Darius Dixon from California. That you know, it's kind of, you get one of those every couple of years or something like that. Now all of a sudden they're much more active. Now a lot more of that is on the line of scrimmage, specifically on the defensive line. But they've extended out there. They've got relationships at different schools. They've got relationships with different trainers and things of that nature. And hey, it makes a lot of sense, because you're looking at a new staff that's coming in, and this is kind of the selling point for a lot of these guys is, hey, new staff is here, which means you're going to play. You're going to come in and play. We need you guys from different parts of the country because they play better football. That's what you tell them. You don't tell that to your Pennsylvania guys, but you're looking at an opportunity to sort of roll over that relationship, but at the same time have an opportunity to play. And I think that's what makes a lot of sense for some of these West Coast guys. And will the return on investment be massive on that one? No, not necessarily. But if you can, again, get a Darius Dixon, get a guy that can come in and start, or get a couple of guys that can come in and play at this level, that makes a difference. So I still think that, you know, this staff is going to run into the same logistical issues that previous staffs have here. It's hard to get here, especially from the West Coast. And you know, it's going to be one of those things where you've got to bring them in at a certain time of year, at a perfect time of year, to get sold on what Penn State brings into mind. Again, Darius Dixon, I think his first visit was for an official visit in June. Beautiful weekend, etc. It's just one of those things where you play the cards that you're dealt, and that's where Penn State stands right now with the West Coast guys. Like I said, that official visit list will continue to grow. And this is kind of where I'm at right now on February 12th is you're getting a lot of guys that are putting out top 6s and top 8s and top 10s and all this stuff, and putting out their schedule of official visits. We saw it last year. It changes. It's all
going to ask about that.
As Nate would say, fluid. It's a situation that I think that with the dead period, you get, I don't want to say this because it sounds old and crotchety, you get less attention. And now it's like, okay, well, how do I recapture some of that market? Oh, I'll put a graphic out with Hayes Fawcett that says I got a top 6 when I'm still talking to 15 schools, which is fine. You know, you handle things. That's your prerogative as a recruit.
Right.
But you're narrowing your focus without shutting a ton of people out. And I think that when we see guys like Maxwell Hiller put out a top 4, does that become a top 6? Because he's had top whatevers before, and they've changed very much so. So I hesitate to get too high or too low. You know, the inclusions and the exclusions are going to change, and Penn State's going to end up with players that they're not really on the list right now on their official visit schedule this summer. And every big program is going to be the same way. So I think that's where we're at. You know, there's a lot of antsy people out there, a lot of pearl clutching right now with how the staff is doing recruiting. And I think it's just part of the natural process. This is an in-between time on the calendar, and we treat it as such in terms of our reaction.
And it's also, I think it's still really important to couch this as they are just building relationships with these players on the East Coast that have been Penn State targets. Like Penn State, the institution, not necessarily the coaching staff. And, you know, some of the people here on the coaching staff still have some of those relationships, but, you know, Terry Smith introducing somebody to a New Jersey linebacker, and then they got to make that relationship kind of work after that. It does take some time. So I guess, where do you think, when it comes to these scheduled visits that we've seen so far, the ones that we know about, the ones that have been announced, where are they on a timeline, in your opinion, from that perspective of this is a new staff versus other schools versus what Penn State had when they had this institutional machine up and churning over the last 5-6 years with James Franklin? I'm not saying like better or worse, but like, just could you gauge where they are in relation to some of those things? Because I think those set the expectations for fans.
Well, first, I think that if you ask a lot of college coaches and staffs, GMs, all that kind of stuff, you're placating the kids right now in terms they see others scheduling visits, and you know they want to follow in the footsteps of other prospects. That, you know, if this guy's setting up official visits, if I don't set up official visits now, I'm behind. But if you ask any coach or anything like that, they still think it's way too early to make those plans, because it is. You've still got the evaluation period ahead of you. We saw, I mean, at least a dozen, maybe 20 guys fall off that official visit list last year. Like that,
Yeah,
and that wasn't a
it's
situation
crazy.
where they fell off in interest, but you fell off in terms of how much you wanted that guy. And the guy that you're recruiting in February might not be the guy that you're recruiting in June, and probably not for the better if that's the case. So I think you're seeing a lot of sort of, okay, well, if you're ready, we have this weekend. We're just going to write this down here. It's going to go, we're going to go on the graphic, and that's going to be great. But on our end, it's in pencil, and we'll move it around if we have to. So I think you're seeing a lot of that right now, all over the country. Penn State's situation is different because this is a new staff, and because this is a staff that came in without a ton of natural connections, and talk about that in a second. But this is not very different than any other situation when it comes to, hey, this is what we got to do right now, but it's almost because we have to do it. And so you're finding that out right now. And that official visit schedule is going to continue to expand and be more solid when we get into April, May, something like that. So I know Ryan feels the same way. I'm sorry he can't voice his opinion on this, but that's kind of where we feel. Now, stepping back to what I said, there's no getting around that they've got a lot of work to do in terms of digging out of the hole that was natural because they came in from Iowa. They didn't have a ton of East Coast ties. Of course, it's great to have Terry. It's great to have Justin Lustig. It's great to have some of these guys that have been around Penn State for a while. Alan Zamitis is a huge, huge liaison piece for Penn State recruiting right now. But at the same time, it's going to take a little bit more time. And the dead period in February is great for coaches because they get to go out and they get to see more things and they get to do all this stuff and see their families, which is really cool. Some people like that. But it's probably also not great for Penn State because they could have used a couple more weekends to get some more players in.
Yeah.
They're going to have to wait until spring practice, which is mid to late March now. So you're going to face some challenges until then. And I think that this is always a challenging time in a Northeast school's recruiting calendar. We'll see how these things change over the course of right now and the course of the next 4 or 5 months. Not overly worried right now. I think there's issues to address, obviously, but not overly worried right now in terms of where they stand.
I do think that there is the element in this conversation as well. There's two aspects of this. One is everyone that wants to say Matt Campbell's never had a good recruiting class. He was at Iowa State, like from a rankings perspective. But I think it's very clear. Look at the number of players they put in the NFL and high draft picks that they put in the NFL as well. They can evaluate. And if there's a year where you really need to rely on your evaluations, well, I guess this is the dichotomy, right? They're always going to rely on their evaluations. But if you need to out-scout people to find players in a year where you're trying to play catch-up, and you need a big class this year as well, I think this is a year where they may be looking for players deep into September, kind of like Elijah Reeder, where we had this conversation about him just a few weeks ago of a guy that was a fast-rising senior that they targeted late in the process to make sure that they could get his commitment at Iowa State and then transition over here to Penn State. So as much as everyone's going to go through the kind of like the pomp and circumstance and the excitement, the pageantry is the word I was looking for, of official visits, I have a feeling, and Fitz, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is going to be like, okay, great that that's over, but full steam ahead, pedal to the metal about trying to find and recruit guys after that period because of a bunch of different factors for this particular season overall with kind of what we're painting for them right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And again, it's going to take time. It's going to take some, like the February the February dead period is not great for them in terms of like that gap between when you can potentially get guys on campus and then spring break being the second week of March. That's going to be a gap too, because you don't really want to host guys and in that little window there because you don't have players on campus to talk to. You don't have some staff members on hand. So, it's just one of those things where there's bumps in the road right here, and we'll see what happens. Again, going back to what we said at the end of the show on Tuesday, they're where they're at for a reason. They're pretty good at evaluating, and they're going to probably need some benefit of the doubt, probably need some time for that to play out. So we'll see what happens
on
with
the
that.
Internet you're not going to get.
Correct. When we do three live shows a week, it's tough to get that benefit of the doubt. But at the same time, you're going to continue to ascend on that level. So we will see what happens, and people do not like we'll see what happens on the internet.
Yeah. So let's get into the BWI Mailbag. We have some questions from BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on the Lions Den message board that we're going to feature on the here on the show. But of course, every single Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you have an opportunity to ask questions here on the show. This is just the official segment on this particular show where we're going to dive into your thoughts and questions. So if you've got one you want to formulate and put into the mailbag, we're going to open that up right now. I'm going to start with this question, Fitz. You've already answered it here on the show, but this is from FR Buff, a new member at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I always want to welcome them to the family. Thank you for not only being over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, but, asking a question, being a part of the message board, and putting one out here for us to talk about on the show. Fitz, what's the latest on the wide receiver coach? Should we expect an announcement shortly? You already mentioned that there's no information there at this point, so we'll move on from that, but wanted to make sure that we got that out there. Again, officially, the status of that is there is no change in what we've been reporting here on the show and over on the site. So let's ask this question for you, and I think this is more of a speculative question than a hard answers question, but Doug21988. Doug and a bunch of numbers wants to know, how will Campbell set up the OVs? I remember Franklin facing some criticism for hosting top-of-the-board recruits too early, even in mid-May last year with Kari Adams, Joey O'Brien, coming early in the process last year, and then, of course, going to another place and committing shortly after that visit. Don't want to get into too much of the retrospective.
Oh, that's not going to happen here. Yeah, that was a mistake on their part because they brought in O'Brien, they brought in Kari Adams in mid-May, and then it is pretty typical of a recruiting process that the first place that you visit, unless it's like straight out blow you away, I'm shutting it down and not going anywhere else, is going to fade at some point. And that's what happened with Penn State with a bunch of prospects last year. And the money aspect played into it, the negotiation aspect played into it, but at the same time, that was a massive misstep, and they kind of were dictated to in that sense. But at the same time, you need to establish yourself and says, hey, this is when we want to get you in. We want to schedule this early. Not so much schedule it in February, but we're going to schedule this and establish this early. And we want you to hold this date because this is when we want to get you in. And that's usually the second or third weekend in June. Those make sense. The calendar sets up this year where I think May 31st is the first weekend. So you're looking at May 31st. A guy like Stanley Montgomery's got an official visit set up then. And then the next 2 weekends, the 5th and the 12th, make a lot of sense for kind of your heavy hitters weekend. We haven't established when they're going to host commits or if they're going to take a similar approach to what they did with the last staff and have a big commitment weekend. That was, I think, the last weekend in May last year. Thought that worked out pretty well. Everything that fell apart after that, nothing. It was not because of the when they hosted their commitments for that weekend, but you get them there, you lock them down, then you bring them back at the end of June as unofficial visitors as well. So you're looking at the 5th and the 12th right now as sort of the meat on the bone type things. You've got to dictate that. You've got to kind of be assertive. And when you talk to these guys, be like, hey, I know that I saw Khalil Taylor tweeted out a date, and he's set for Penn State for June 5th, at least with the new staff with the old receivers coach that's going to be replaced by the new receivers coach. That was June 5th. We'll see if that holds up. But, he tweeted out yesterday a Colorado visit and a Syracuse visit. If you're Penn State, you say, hey, come on, we're going to dictate this. This is when we want you on campus because you're such a high priority to us, not because, you're just kind of squashing the bug there, but you're a high priority to us. So we need to get you here then. And I think that's when you look at the criticism there that Doug had. It was very, very much a one-time situation. They've been fine in terms of scheduling official visits.
That was what I was kind of skirting around, is I didn't want to get into the debate of did they have a choice or not, and you should dictate the choice if you can, but it felt like Kari Adams and that particular situation, those guys were making some decisions on their side of the ball that Penn State didn't necessarily have control over. Shanna Shadow says, this is not a question, she just wanted to say, daughter just committed to Penn State. So excited to be part of a university as amazing as Penn State. I should say, I don't know if Shanna I don't know the Sorry to
Yeah, you caught yourself in that one too.
misgender.
Huh?
My bad.
Congratulations.
So,
Yes,
congratulations. So that's pretty cool. Always love it when people get to make announcements and are super excited about stuff here on the show. And thanks for being here. And we're going to be here for as long as your daughter is at Penn State as well. This one from Poncho 570, we talked about this one on the show as well. I wanted to follow up this conversation. With this most likely being a big recruiting class, I'm curious how the recruits on the defensive side of the ball look, more so the position flexibility versus how many are just pigeonholed into different positions given Lynn's scheme and how it can be against different matchups. So I kind of truncated Poncho 570's question there, but I'm wondering what you think about this particular group of evaluators, the defense, and their open interest in having guys that have position versatility from Matt Campbell on his side of the fence and Danton Lynn, the coordinator he brought in.
That was the truncated version? Wow. Okay. You're looking at a bigger defense, especially up front. I mean, we've seen their outlook in the portal, right? And they're not going to go out and I don't see too many 340-pound high school kids floating around in terms of good prospects. You know, there's a couple out there that are massive, but you're not recruiting those guys. So they're going to have to continue to recruit pretty much the same blueprint from before. It's just a matter of building them up and finding the guys that have that frame that can hold just a little bit more. You know, you're not talking about going from 300 pounders to 350 pounders. You're talking about going from 300 pounders to 320 pounders. You know, there's nobody wants an extra 20 pounds, but those guys, they'll grin and bear it. So you're looking at bigger there. We talked about Mekhi Brown a little bit earlier, bigger defensive ends. For stereotyping purposes, the Iowa State defense, bigger, a little bit slower than Penn State's, and you're seeing some of that come across from a size perspective. But I think what Matt Campbell and his staff are finding is there's a lot of really good athletes out here that can play big and fast. So that's what you have to go with. I mean, you're not looking at, hey, we're going to stop recruiting corners that are 5'10". No, you're going to recruit him as a nickel. You're going to recruit him as a slot corner. You're going to recruit him as the best player that he can possibly be and fit him into your scheme. From you talking to Danton Lynn, there's no blueprint here. There's no prototype. Now, this Division I football, there's going to be size limitations for a lot of guys. You're going to have to get past that if they're good enough. If not, they're not going to be recruited here. So I don't think so. I think what we've gotten into is with the previous staff, we talked about arm length. We talked about, you know, all these different metrics and things like that. And people took that as to mean that's the stuff that matters and the football does not matter. You want athletes, not football players. That's not the case. Right. That's not really the case. You had a couple guys that made a lot of sense. You know, you talk about Amari Evans. Is a special athlete. He's a 4-3 guy in the sense that there are not many 4-3 guys out there. You just got to figure out what he is as a player. Turned out didn't really work out at receiver here. So you find some of those guys sometimes, but I think that the whole hindsight of he recruited athletes, not football players, pretty incorrect because, hey, Tyler Warren is a hell of an athlete. And he was a good football player in high school, but
not a freak athlete.
Not a freak.
Not in terms of running a 40 and
well, not a freak, but also not a football player in the sense that you looked at this guy and said he's going to be a first-round pick. You know, you looked at him and you saw the traits that mattered, and it's about meeting those things in the middle and taking a guy like that was committed to Virginia Tech at one point as a quarterback and seeing the special traits that he potentially has, and then all of a sudden, you know, maybe you find out he's not a quarterback anymore. I'm just spitballing as a potential, you know, just Tyler Warren, not anybody else that's on the roster right now that just enrolled. So you're looking at a different sort of approach when you step into deeper waters with Matt Campbell. It's going to be fascinating to see how he balances the athletes that he's now around. It's like, you know, the Northeast is not as densely populated with talent as it used to be. So if you were stepping from the Northeast into Florida and you throw a rock in every direction, you find a Division I prospect. That's not the case in Pennsylvania. But imagine going from Iowa to Pennsylvania. That's the same. That's a similar type step. So it's going to be a learning process for those guys.
Which is, to give context to what Salvatore Zagres says here in the chat, he says, sad truth is Campbell isn't a recruiter. He's a developer. If you want to be the Iowa Hawkeyes, Iowa State or Minnesota, that's great. If you want to be Ohio State, Alabama, or Oregon, definitely not. And when you're recruiting at Iowa State, what are you expecting? Like that, the zero tolerance, no context, no nuance to the situation is unhelpful. and is what we're talking about here. Now, could he have some issues recruiting? Because as Fitz just pointed out, the relationships in this part of the country aren't necessarily as strong. But that is not the question long term. The question is, can they be? And what he was able to do, what he's able to find in the Midwest and develop was impressive. And so, that is the context of what we're talking about here and what Fitz just said.
Yeah. I think a very small percentage of your roster is going to be freakish. They can make it in anywhere type of guys. And then you're going to have to develop the rest. And at Iowa State did a really good job developing.
Let's go with this one here. This is from Lamgol, although I should have gone with a different route. But Lamgol has a great question. I wanted to get to it. I've noticed with the new Campbell regime, almost all position coaches have assistants. What's the role of the assistant position coach? This is not necessarily a new thing, but it was all built very quickly and in front of us, as opposed to maybe some of the layering that we saw as the staffs expanded over the last couple of years. So what is your understanding of these assistant position coaches on the roster?
Yeah, I mean, this is the new normal in terms of college football, building out its massive staffs to basically be NFL staffs, right? We talked about this with you look at the defensive line last year, and they had 3 or 4 defensive line coaches. Deion Barnes, the coach in name, but at the same time, Andrew Jackson, very important. Greg Gattuso, very important in terms of developing these guys. So there's a lot of work to be accomplished on the practice field. And a couple of years ago, they passed, actually, I think it was just the start of last season, or 2 seasons ago, they allowed these former analysts or whatever you call them to be on-field coaches. Did they do it before that? They did. No, it's kind of under the rug. But it's about expanding the staff and getting as much accomplished as possible. Also, you can get some pretty good get some pretty good coaches in there as assistant to the assistant coaches. Get paid a little less, still do a ton of work. And that's where you see these staff salary pools just booming, because you're trying to add as many people as possible to accomplish as much as possible. Probably less on the true analyst side anymore, in terms of like those guys that come in and they watch film and they do a lot of your prep and they do a lot of those things in the office. Now it's, you do that, but also you get to coach on the field, and that makes a big difference.
Right. One thing, just to give you an example of some of the things I've seen with the assistant coaches. So the assistant quarterbacks coach, Trace McSorley, during certain portions of the year, and I'm not saying this is what Matt Campbell's staff is going to do, but this is just the more granular level of coaching you can do when you have an assistant, which is Andy Kotelnicki and Danny O'Brien would work with the starter or the top 2 quarterbacks, and then you would have Trace McSorley working on fundamental stuff with the underclassmen. Some of the younger quarterbacks, guys that are not going to be in the game plan, working on making them better at specific things that they need work with. The receivers did the same thing, where you're working on different aspects of what those young guys need to develop in order to be part of the conversation with the top group. So you would see some of those, the assistant receivers coach or the assistant offensive line coach working with younger players to try and accelerate their growth, while the position coach proper is able to work with the starters on getting ready to win that week, or in training camp, getting them in the competition so they're learning the defense and they're expanding their knowledge of what they're going to be asked to do later in the year. With this particular situation, I'd say the only difference is, and it's not even necessarily a difference, it's just very much more emphasized, is that the defensive line is going to have 2 full-time position coaches working with the edges, and the defensive tackles with less overlap. Still going to be some overlap, but less overlap between those 2 positions with 2 full-time coaches, where before it was an assistant coach working with the edges or the defensive tackles, and then Deion Barnes would flip between the 2 positions. So that'd be the one area I'd notice.
And it's always been hard breaking into this fraternity of coaches at this level, at least. But this opens it up a little bit. So you're kind of siphoning off from, a guy that used to be a GA and he have to go to Elon. He'd have to go to an FCS school or something like that, cut his teeth, and then come back up. And there's value in that, no doubt about it. A ton of great coaches have come from that atmosphere. But now you can keep that guy on staff. Jordan Lucas is your assistant cornerbacks coach. He was a GA a year ago. So you've got an opportunity to expand your pool, get young guys in there. And I will say this, a lot of young guys, those assistant position coaches, they are good recruiters because they're younger. They can relate. They can do a lot of things that make people feel at home. And sometimes you're going to find that a prospect is going to connect better with the younger assistant than he is going to connect with the older guy.
Yeah. And hopefully what we've seen, not directly, but we also have seen that this is a pipeline for future promotion, especially on the offensive side for Matt Campbell, where some of these young assistants that are with the program rise through the ranks and then become coordinators like Taylor Mauser. Or, on the defensive side of the ball, they've had guys leave and then come back and be coaches at positions or however that might work. So it is a way to increase your familiarity with guys who then maybe they go and get a job somewhere else, but they're able to then take that experience, prove they can do it at a higher level, and you have that trust of knowing you've worked with them before and they understand how you want things done, and then they can come back to your program. So there's some opportunities, a couple of different ways to kind of produce a pipeline for yourself.
Yeah, and it gives those coaches an opportunity to, if they need to follow somebody, if Dan Connor goes and gets a coordinator job somewhere, he's going to look around to a couple of his closer guys that were on the staff and go with him. I mean, Jim Knowles took Anthony Poindexter, yes, but he also took Andrew Jackson, who was assistant defensive line coach. So there's many connections that can be formed here in terms of a coaching staff and a coaching tree, and you're going to see that thing sort of splinter more quickly because there are more jobs in that realm.
We're going to have 2 more questions, but it's going to consist of 3 more questions. 2 of these pair perfectly together. So this is the first one from J Mill, bunch of numbers. Decent amount of posters seem to be pessimistic with Penn State's recruiting right now on the message board. Considering the circumstances, he thinks they're doing a pretty good job. Wonder what you think of the staff and the recruiting expectations, and how well you expect the future recruiting the staff to be. Followed immediately on the thread by this one from We Are, bunch of numbers. Should Penn State fans brace themselves for a mid-3-star quarterback to commit that hopefully fits Campbell's system in this upcoming class? Seems like the top-tier recruits are either committed somewhere else or just not really interested in Penn State. My response is it's way too soon with the new staff to really have an understanding of what is and is not interest with this particular group. I could be wrong. I am not fully invested in the recruiting as much as Ryan and Fitz are in terms of the day-to-day stuff, but I just thought it was a perfect one then the other of, hey, seems like everybody's a downer, and then kind of the Eeyore post of the day of, hey, we should expect bad things, right, Fitz?
Right.
So
absolutely.
What do you think? What do you think about this situation?
Yeah, I think it's a bit early for that. I kind of talked about this on Tuesday. I'll talk about it again today. It's like you're looking at a scenario where you're building out of a natural hole, and it's going to take some time. And again, you're not signing your class on February 12th. This is not new. This is not a different it's a different situation for Penn State fans because they've been so used to the same thing over and over again, but this is not an outlier situation at all. I think Penn State will be fine. There are challenges. I think that is not to be said that there are not challenges. Matt Campbell head-to-head with some of the, brash top recruiters, that's going to be a challenge. Penn State's ability to continue to be in the market or set the market for top prospects is going to be a challenge. I still think that Penn State's going to be in a similar situation as it was to Franklin, where their 5 stars are going to be guys that they get early or fairly early. And lo and behold, by the end of the cycle, they're 5 stars, or close to it, something like that. You look back at Penn State's recent experiences with that, and a guy like Cooper Cousins was, the first commit in the class, and then all of a sudden he ends up at the 5-star after a great showing at the All-American Bowl. So I think there's a lot of what we've seen in the past that is going to materialize with the new staff, whether people want to admit it or not. But it's going to be a slower burn than people want it to be. Again, I made this comparison on Tuesday, and I looked it up. It's Veruca Salt from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that just wants everything right now, and that's kind of where we're at right now. We're looking at guys looking elsewhere, but it's a long process, and it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be a top 5 class. I don't think it's going to be a top 10 class, but it's going to be a pretty good class. And at the end of the day, they're going to show you what they do best, I believe, which is find really, really good talent that some of it's going to be head to head with top programs. Some of it's not going to be, but you're going to find yourself in situations that are pretty good. A couple of guys that we had written down earlier for the unofficial visit when we were talking about guys getting back to campus. Excuse me, I'm Googling at the same time. Guys getting back to campus in the spring and things that matter. You guy like Case Alexander is one of the top linebackers in the country from Oklahoma. And you just don't think about these guys in the sense of Penn State's probably the leader right now because He's out of sight, out of mind. His brother his brother played for Matt Campbell at Iowa State, but being in Oklahoma, that makes a difference. Cooper Terwilliger, South Dakota, again, out of sight, out of mind. Guy was on campus a couple weeks ago. I think Penn State leads there too. So I think there are a bunch of guys in this class that you can look at and say, hey, he's going to end up not only at Penn State, but also much higher in the recruiting rankings than he is right now. Blake Benton from Minnesota visited a couple weeks ago. Everybody and their brother has put in a pick for him to go to Penn State. He's going to have a 4-star prospect. So this process is going to play out. It's not going to be the same as it is on February 12th. There will be challenges. They will lose some guys. They are going to be different. There's going to be similar results to what we saw last summer, but there's going to be wins as well.
Part of this, I will just say, and I don't like repeating myself as much but it happens. There is this sense that things were going to change because they fired the head coach and then the athletic director promised a bunch of things. Yeah. And those things may or may not materialize, right? Like I think there's an opportunity for some of them to materialize, but the feeling was, okay, now we're going to steal prospects from Oregon or from Notre Dame instead of the reverse. And now it's Penn State's turn to be on the warpath and throw money around and buy a championship. And there is that, whether it was an optimism or a pessimism from people who like or don't like that style of recruiting, that is not the coach they hired. And so because they didn't come out and Keemon Spell and Khalil Taylor and everybody else just immediately jump back on board, there is this, as you mentioned, the natural geological formation that happened after you cratered the recruiting side of the program for a while that they have to dig themselves out of. And part of that is getting some recruits. And Newhart asked this when he says, no rush. He asked this earlier in the show. Do you feel like there is a commit before the blue-white game? Still too early with the new staff? Not asking for a flurry of them, but do you think there are guys that make sense to commit if they visit in the spring? They like the program. We're not going to wait for the official visits, or is it going to be a lot of that in the summer?
Yeah, I think more of it's going to be in the summer. But I think, it's certainly possible. You've got spring visits coming up. And again, it's a long time until June. It's also a long time until April, when that blue-white game is. So they're going to host a bunch of guys during spring practice. And I think that, typically when you see those guys fall, it's in-state guys in the region, guys that have been here a bunch. And I think that makes sense from that point of view. But again, I think the top guys are going to wait for official visits all over the country to get this thing done and to maximize their value as they should. So on the flip side of that, was talking to some folks in the building last week or 2 weeks ago, and this isn't a pressure staff. And I don't think that's going to sit well with some people. I see in the chat that's not sitting well with some people, but it's not a situation where they came in and were like, okay, we've got to crest this wave a month in or a month and a half in. And they had a heck of a run through the portal. They got a couple of 2026 guys. There are many challenges ahead. I feel like people aren't hearing that, but there are many challenges ahead. But the challenges is that one of the challenges was not to have 5 commits in the 2027 class by 2 months on the job. That's where we're at. Okay. Seltz, you're one of those. So Seltz is in the chat. It's good to see. He's in another round of chemo, so he's passing the time by joining us, which I couldn't think of anything better. So all the best to you, buddy. I'll text you after the show.
Yeah, appreciate you being here, Seltz. Last question and I don't know, you can go anywhere you want with this, because K-Mac says, what have you or we learned about Terry Smith since the Oregon game that may have surprised or impressed you? I'll go first here just because I had a chance to think about this. There was a certain, and admittedly, I did not know Terry as well as a position coach as I've known some of the other coordinators or other coaches that we've talked to more. His ability to create and then execute a game plan in the middle of the season to change the team around took basically 2.5 weeks. They were in it for a while against Indiana because they were able to reorient things. So the clarity of his vision in the season, I thought, was really impressive. And that kind of emergency decision-making is not something that everyone's great at. And Terry, I think, did a phenomenal job at managing an emergency and putting them in position to be successful and to not end on such a flat note. Fitz, is there anything recruiting related or anything otherwise that you wanted to hit with Terry here?
Not particularly. Terry's always been measured, and I do think that there's an element of kind of what you said in terms of like, well, why can't we do this? And then turning around and doing it. Like, I think that that's like when we watch coaches try to be the smartest or try to basically play chess when you could, I don't even know if like checkers is the right word for what Penn State did over the last month of the season. There's probably like just like my kid running monster trucks into each other, when he was 2. That's probably more apt to the game that he was playing. But I think he just kind of said, hey, why can't we run it 70% of the time? And why can't we do this and do that? And put it into action, which is easier said than done, especially in hindsight. But I think he did a wonderful job with that.
So that'll do it for today's show. If you didn't hear your question from the message board, I apologize. You got your question in after we had started the live show. So there's just a natural break that happens. Of course, if you want to be a part of this, you want to have your question featured on the show, you can join us over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com for the weekly mailbag forum and a bunch of other stuff, including our Friday chats, which we get into a lot of stuff, and some of that is the ooey gooey good stuff, the intel you really want to know about. Also, we have a chance to do a full weekend of conversation here in the off season, so you get a lot of detail, a lot of things that we just don't have time for here on an hour show. So, Fitz, thank you for your time this week. I know you've been pulling a lot of weight here. We've had some people off, and so you've been doing a heavy lift this week, and I appreciate you being here and doing an awesome job. Got us through 2 of the shows on this week, so we'll be back, I think, to our regular schedule next week, and if not, we'll adapt and survive, and we will make sure that our game plan is strong, and we'll get another W as we get into the middle of February. So for Fitz, I'm T. Frank. We'll be back next week. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, give it a high five, give it a hug, give it a hype, whatever it is. We will talk to you.